What is up, guys? So we're going to learn some of the basics of Dark and Darker today. It'll teach new players how to get into the game and where to begin, going through character selection all the way to the point of actually playing through the raid and trying to survive your first raid. So we're going to go over the basics just from the beginning. There's two different versions of the game. There's the legendary status, which is when you actually buy the game, and then there's the free-to-play version. I'm going to note the difference between the two editions is the free-to-play version only has one character slot, whereas if you pay for the game, you have the Legendary Edition, you have all 9 character slots to have one character of each class. So we're going to start out by choosing our character. I would recommend picking whatever class you identify with best, whichever one you think is the fantasy you would enjoy best. Though if you really do want to start with one of the easier classes, if you want to do melee combat or bows or anything like that, I would recommend Fighter as the easiest class to get into, or if you want to do magic, I would say Cleric is probably the easiest magic class to get into. So we're going to go ahead and make a character and start going over the perks and everything. So here we are on our Fighter, or whatever class you chose to play. The first thing I would do is come up to the top left here, and I would go to the class tab. This is you're going to familiarize yourself with this the most. This is pretty much what your class is. So starting out, you have 1 perk slot and 2 ability slots. At level 5, you'll get an additional perk. At level 10, you'll get another perk, and at 15, you'll get your final perk. You can always have 2 skills. It can be whatever you want to run. You can read through all of them for whatever class you're playing and figure out which ones you think you want to run. And then you get to pick your first perk and take whichever it is you want there. At level 5, 10, and 15, make sure you come revisit and grab some extra perks. I would play around with these a lot as you learn the game. Spellcasters, it's slightly different. We're going to go into that next, though. So I popped over here onto my Cleric real quick to show you how class works for Cleric. See, there's the perks and skills, but there's an additional tab here for spells. So whenever you're playing a spellcaster, something you always need to take is the ability Spell Memory. If you don't have Spell Memory, then you can't cast spells. So you always need to have this on. It is also possible to get more spells if you choose in the future when you take Spell Memory too, but we'll go into that a little bit later. The same is here for the casters as well, though. While they'll have to spend one of their abilities to take Spell Memory, they still get an additional skill they could take, and they also get the perks just as any other character would. However, now we also have the Spell tab. So when setting up as a spellcaster, you're going to come into the Spell tab, and this is exactly how it looks for every class. If you go to Bard, if you go to Wizard, they all have the same thing. There's a cost limit down here, and then you have your spells here on the side. Basically, the way it works is this is your spell memory. So the Cleric starts off with 14 spell memory. The costs of the skills are associated right here on the right side, so you can pick whichever spells you want. However, if you go over top the limit of your spells, if I just take the 2 biggest spells, you'll see I already don't have room for the spells, and you see Locust Swarm is grayed out. This means I do not have enough knowledge to run Locust Swarm. You can pick up knowledge in the dungeon, which will give you more spell memory, so you can take a spell that you don't have room for, but you won't be able to use it right away until you find more knowledge. I would recommend not ever going too far over your knowledge limits, though. A standard set of spells could look something like... So a fairly normalized list of spells would look something like this, where I'm slightly over top of my limit. I think I could find 2 knowledge pretty reliably in the dungeon, so I would take that. Until you feel comfortable with it, you might want to just take something that you can field and just have 5 spells that you could always cast, and you don't have to worry about knowledge. It is good usually to get in the practice of getting bigger spells eventually, though. So I would recommend just trying all of the spells out. If you don't have room for it, swap out some spells, take what you can, and try to learn all of the spells, but you'll eventually figure out which ones you do and don't like. So just a quick explanation on how knowledge works real quick, or at least spell memory. There's 2 different ways you can get spell memory. There's actually rolls on gear that will say additional spell memory or additional percentage of spell memory, and those will just bolster this number directly. The other way is specifically the knowledge stat. So I'm gonna come over here, and I see I have these 2 knowledge rawhide gloves that will bring my knowledge from 20 to 22. If we come back over to the spell memory, we'll now see that I have the 16. The extra 2 knowledge increased my cost limit by 2 as well. So if you find any knowledge along the way in the dungeon, or if you just come along to the merchants and check out, like Leathersmith might have rawhide gloves. There's also shoes and hats you can get that will also give you knowledge you can check through. Though it looks like at the moment the rawhide gloves might be it. There's the Crusader plate that also gives knowledge. There's various different forms for each of the different caster to use. The general idea, though, is that more knowledge will increase your cost limit. It also does things like increasing your cast speed times. So briefly, we're just going to go over the base stats of the game, starting with strength, which will increase how much physical power you have. It increases your weapon with melee weapons as well as bows. It also slightly increases your health at a 1-to-4 ratio. So every 4 strength, you'll get 1 point of health added to your pool. Vigor drastically increases your health with a 75% scaling. So 4 vigor will give you 3 health. It also increases how fast you recover your health. If you are sitting, whether you're at a bonfire or not, you'll recover your health faster based on vigor. Agility is how fast you interact with objects such as doors and things like mining. It also increases your movement speed of your character. It also slightly increases the action speed of the character, so things like attack speed when you're attacking. However, dexterity, on the other hand, drastically increases the action speed, so you'll get more out of your attack speed from increasing this. It also increases how fast you can equip and unequip items. Your will increase your magical interaction speed, things like interacting with shrines and opening blue portals and red portals. It also increases your spell power and increases how long your buffs or curses durations are. It also will increase your magic resistance and reduce how much damage you take from magical abilities. Next is knowledge, which increases the memory capacity for your character and how many spells you can store, as well as your actual spell casting speed. You will cast spells much faster with higher knowledge. Next is resourcefulness. This increases your interaction speed much more than agility does. It also significantly increases how fast you install items such as traps and campfires. This is the bread and butter for, say, a ranger who's placing a lot of traps. This will also be your most resourcefulness character on a team will be the one you want to set campfires with. Health is pretty straightforward. There will be items that give you direct health, but for the most part, this will scale off of your vigor and your strength of your character. The last thing we're going to briefly touch on is your persuasiveness. This is only for bards, but it scales directly off of your resourcefulness, and it increases how long your buffs last, specifically for bard buffs. Other buffs will scale off of your buff duration, which will come from will. Bards specifically need to get persuasiveness, which comes from resourcefulness. Just to go over the merchants really quickly, the basic way that these guys work is they have a couple of items you could buy off them. The items are pretty standardized, though they do randomly reset every 30 minutes. They will be fairly similar. The armor will always have heavy armor. The leathersmith will always have leather armor. The tailor will always have cloth armor. But when you do their quests for them, sometimes you will get affinity as their quest reward. It depends on what the quest is. The affinity will upgrade what they can and what they can sell to you. So they might have better tiers of potions or better tiers of weapons, or it might lower the costs of them. It'll also affect what you have access to at the Squire, which we'll go over next. So the Squire, when you're doing normal lobbies, is the basic loadout you have. Every time you die, you will come back with whatever your base gear is set up to be. You can go to the Squire here and you can select exactly what pieces of gear you want to have on. You always want to make sure you have your potions and bandages and everything set up. But you know, say I don't want to run a sword and shield, I could run a battle axe instead on the fighter. Every class has access to different tools, and every class also will get different tools as you do quests. If I do the weaponsmith quests, it might give me more choices of weapons to start with at the Squire. It'll also upgrade slowly the tiers of the weapons that I start with. So right now this is a poor gray falchion. If I do enough weaponsmith quests, eventually it'll turn into a white common falchion. And all of the gear kind of does the same progression path where you'll slowly upgrade them along the way as your base kit. The last thing we'll talk about before we actually start moving over to going into a raid is the customize tab or the shop tab. It'll be the two of them combined. The shop, as you play through the game, you will slowly gain these blue shards. I believe if you bought the higher edition of the game, you also get red shards initially. But as you survive dungeons, you'll slowly get blue shards, or you could buy red shards if you so choose. These will allow you access to additional races, and the races can be purchased with either shards. Sometimes cosmetics will be only red shards, which is the cash currency, but there will always be an option, especially for the races, to at least have one that you can buy with blue shards. The races, they each have different slight modifiers. They won't be drastic gameplay changes, but they can slightly change things. If I want to be slightly stronger but slightly slower, I could take the orc, for example. If you do decide to pick up any races along the way, some editions also come with some races. All you have to do is you go to your customize tab and then you right click and equip the race. Just do keep in mind that some of these have penalties as well for what they are. Almost all of them have a trade-off. So, for example, the lizardmen can't wear helmets. So we've set up our squire. We decided we wanted to go with a battle axe. We're going to set that as our base gear. Make sure we grab some shoes. Once it's set as the base gear, we hit equip. And now every time I die, this will be my loadout. You're finally ready to go into your first dungeon. You click play. You go to your maps here. And now you're given a couple of different options. If you're in a group, I would recommend choosing your group size. If you're alone, I would recommend playing solos. I don't recommend going into trios as a solo while you're still learning. The way that the maps work, and we're about to see it here actually in a minute, is there's 3 different map options, and only one of them will be the solo map at the time. So right now for me, Frost Mountain is the solo map, but every 3 minutes, the map that is the solo map, duo map, and trio map will rotate one over. So after Frost Mountain is solo, it's going to switch over to Goblin Caves, and Goblin Caves will be the solo map for me. So if you do want to choose a specific map, you may have to wait a certain period of time to get the rotations, or if you don't care, you can just keep sending the solo map. I will say, I do recommend learning Goblin Caves and Frost Mountain before the Forgotten Castle. Forgotten Castle is a little bit more difficult to get out at the moment. They may make some changes to this in the future, but there are less extracts on the map, so it is slightly harder to find your way out of that map, I would say. But it just switched to Goblin Caves, so we'll start up a Goblin Caves real quick. So we queue into the lobby there real quick. You can inspect people if you wanted to. In high roller lobbies, you could actually see what kind of gear people are running. In normal lobbies, you expect everyone to have around the same tier gear, so it doesn't matter too much. So you load into your first raid. You've got not much on you, and you have no idea where you're going. How do you survive the first raid? You just got to look around the map, and you can see right here in the bottom right corner, there is a blue marker right in the center of that area there. That means it's an extract. Anywhere that's blue on the map is an extract. But you do need to learn what the extracts are, because some of them are only able to be used once, and they're not always open, so someone might be able to beat you to it. So throughout your trip, you're going to be taking a lot of damage in various ways and places. If you look at the health bar there at the bottom, you'll see that the health bar has 2 different segments to it now after I took a little bit of damage. You'll see there is a grayish red portion and then a straight gray portion. This is recoverable and non-recoverable health. So bandages can only heal your health to a recoverable state. After that meter that's filled up is done, I won't be able to heal any further. After that though, you can heal your unrecoverable health with some skills, as well as with things like campfires. You can also recover your non-recoverable health by resting. If you find somewhere safe that you think you won't be attacked at, if you press the G key, you'll just sit down and your health will slowly start to recover. Though do keep in mind, classes with higher vigor recover faster. Some classes will take a long time. Rogue in particular, and Wizard as well, seem to take a very long time to recover their health while sitting. This is also how you operate campfires. If you needed to help heal your health up and you have a campfire, you just place it. And once it's done placing, you can sit down the same way you did before, and your health will recover much faster, as well as recovering your non-recoverable health. You also can use abilities and certain skills to recover your health. The Fighter's Second Wind, for example, I have on right now. Though most of these abilities have some kind of limitation. Second Wind, for example, does not recover. You have to sit at a campfire to get your Second Wind back. And healing spells will also need to be recovered. So you've entered the dungeon and you're looking to fight your first enemy. You see a goblin over here. Something to keep in mind is if I get in that enemy's face and I just keep backing up, well, the goblin in particular might be able to not hit me, but for the most part, most enemies will still be able to hit you if you just back up. You'll notice when you back up, you go very slow and it's hard to avoid attacks. Most people learn to counteract the slow movement speed is to actually move sideways. So when you're getting attacked by something and you need to avoid their attack, you're just going to sidestep it. And eventually you'll get kind of into a rhythm of never really backing up. You just kind of sidestep everything. So while you're learning, the easiest way to deal with most mobs is to bait out a swing, sidestep it, and then go for an attack yourself, and then back off again. You'll learn a lot of attack patterns this way, and some can be avoided other ways, or you might be able to get extra attacks in, but I would recommend just going for one swing as you go each time while you're learning. As we begin to loot the map, you'll start picking up gear. You'll find higher rarities, different kinds of gear along the way. Some items, such as the Goblin's Ear, are just treasure items that could be used for some quests or they could be sold. Other items, such as this heater shield, is a piece of equipment. you'll see that if it's green, you won't be able to bring it back into a normal raid. Anything that's above gray, so anything colored green, blue, or purple, or higher, you can't bring into normal raids, but you can start stockpiling them and saving them up for when you hit level 20 and can start going into the real dungeons, the high roller dungeons. You'll learn as you start to fight enemies that different weapons have different attack patterns and have different reaches, and you'll get more and more comfortable with them. For example, daggers are kind of hard to get used to because they have a very low reach. You have to literally get in front of the enemy, which make it a little harder to evade their attacks. But longer weapons like this battle axe, you can abuse distance and hit enemies from fairly far away. Shields can be a little bit difficult to get used to in the game. You have to physically block exactly where the enemy's swinging, and if you don't, it will not block it. However, with most enemies, it will fully stagger them after you block an attack, and you can get a free attack in afterwards. A lot of people opt to dodging attacks because there's a lot less inherent risk involved, but if you do get good with a shield, you can learn how to avoid most enemies and get some free damage, and that's a little harder to get with others. Do keep in mind that all of the shields have different hitboxes, and some can be slightly harder to use than others. The same could be said about enemy shields. Any enemies that actually have shields in the game, if you hit their shield, it will reflect off of it. It will do no damage to the enemy. You gotta be a little careful to make sure you don't hit their shields, and some enemies will really abuse their shields and hold it in front of them to block a lot of attacks. So you have to learn all of the individual enemies' attack patterns. We're not going to go through every enemy in the game here, but just a general idea is if you hit them in the head, it'll hurt them for more damage. If you hit them in the shield, it won't do any damage. Not all enemies will have shields, but a lot of them do, so I would get used to learning exactly how to avoid hitting them. Another thing to keep in mind is that different weapons have different movement speed penalties. All of the armor do as well. If you look, there's -3 movement speed on the Adventurer's Tunic. The Battle Axe has -35 movement speed. The Heater Shield has -20. If the weapon is out, it slows you down quite drastically. And say a rogue with daggers and cloth armor is going to run a lot faster and be able to keep up with you if you're trying to run away as a fighter with some heavier armors. You can, however, stow your weapons with the X key and you run significantly quicker, especially if you have heavy weapons. This is also something to keep in mind when you have like 2 weapons, for example, like a rogue with 2 daggers. Each dagger's movement speed penalty will apply, and so you may want to opt to only using the 1 dagger rather than both to prevent having the double movement speed penalty. Not all abilities are created equal. If you look at the 2 I have on right now, you'll see there's a little 1 in the corner for my second wind, and there's nothing with sprint. Because if I use sprint, it has a buff for a short duration, and then it goes on cooldown. And after that cooldown ends, I will gain my movement speed, or my sprint back and be able to reuse it. However, that 1 next to my second wind is because if I use it, I lose it. It goes to 0. I can't use it again unless I exit the dungeon and come back in, or if I take a campfire and sit at it to recover it. So we're going to go over the basics of using magic real quick. You'll see right now I have 2 locked out spells. These are because we don't have the knowledge for them. I'll find that a little later and show exactly how that works. But I took a couple basic spells just to show how they work. Basically, you charge it up, and then whenever you release is when it'll go off. You do have to land actually on target with spells to hit them with it. I actually probably didn't grab the best of spells to show this really, but for example, if I wanted to hit him with a Holy Light here, you have to actually land the shot on them. If it is an ability that you can self-cast with, we just take some damage here real quick. Lesser Heal, for example, you can hit yourself with. Holy Light, you cannot. If I just aim at nothing, it'll cast on self instead. So, when fighting monsters in PvE, players as well, every weapon has a specific box in which it does more damage. For example, the flail here, I can hit them with the post end of it, just the back of the handle. That does a lot less damage. I think it's 40% scaling on that particular weapon, compared to if you hit them with the actual blunt end of it. Almost all weapons operate this way. Daggers and rapiers do not, but pretty much everything else has a sour spot where it hits less, and a sweet spot where it hits harder on it. So you do, most of it's fairly intuitive. If it's like a long sword, you hit them with the pointy end. But you want to usually try to use what makes sense for the actual bladed part of the weapon. Even though you can deal damage with most of the weapon, you want to hit with where it matters. So you've run out of spell slots. You're looking over here. You've already burned all of your sanctuaries. You don't have any left. You've already used some of your other healing spells. What do? Well, the same way you recover health when you rest, your spells will also start to recharge. If you look at the spells, you'll see there's a little meter that goes up on them. Every time that ticks all the way up, you'll get an additional cast of your spell back up to whatever their limit is. So you always want to keep that in mind. You want to take some time to rest, find a safe area that you've already cleared out where you can get your spells back. Not all spells recover at the same rate though, so something like Sanctuary, that's a much more powerful spell, will take a lot longer. Campfires drastically increase the amount of time, or the speed at which spells recover at though. So sometimes Dark and Darker can get very chaotic. You can get a lot of enemies on you at once, completely surrounded, and you have no idea how to handle this as a new player. You don't know how to defeat some of these mobs in general, let alone how to take them all at once. Often the best strategy is just to try to run along, kite them around. If there are spiders that have the spider pots, they're going to be your first priority. You want to break those first because the spiders will continue to respawn. But basically you want to try to bait out the attacks of anything that you might have a problem with dealing with. And then after they've all attacked, try to get a hit in on some of them. Things like the spider's poison can be blocked with a shield if you're able to predict where it's going to be coming from. And don't greed trying to hit multiple times. Take your time, hit one at a time. You might take a little bit of damage, especially the spiders can be very, very annoying in these kind of situations. But if you just gradually poke down the enemies, eventually you'll clean them out. I would just make sure you never hit the S key. You're never wanting to walk back. You always want to kite left and right and dodge in a circle. Anything, especially with projectiles, will end up eventually hitting you if you continuously run in the back in a straight line. And you also move significantly slower. There'll also be some enemies, such as the spider or the dragonfly in the back there, that'll help you along the way. As they're trying to hit you, sometimes they hit each other, and that could help in a big cluster of enemies in one room. You can also jump over some of these attacks too. That'll help you get around the room if you're stuck, but I would be careful of pushing yourself back too far into a corner. You'll quickly learn where you can and can't go, but if I were to say get back into this corner, I could become trapped in there if I have too many enemies following me along the way. So you'll notice in the top right corner of your mini map, there is a timer that's counting down always. Once this timer hits 0, you will die. If it gets down low enough, the game will have some, depending on the map, have different variables. Oh, look at that. So if you look at the minimap, there is a blue marker indicating there's a rope ladder here. Almost every extract in the game is indicated by a blue marker on the minimap. However, only one player can take each of these extracts. So if I were to have taken it, someone else might see this marker here and come to try to extract here, and they won't be able to because it's already taken. So you do want to always plan ahead, but if you only have a minute left on the clock and you run to an extract, you might find that it's already been taken. Another thing to keep in mind of is that not all extracts are available from the beginning of the raid. For example, this rope ladder just descended from the ceiling. It didn't come until there was roughly 6 minutes remaining in the raid. If I came here too early, I would not be able to take this. However, I could come here and wait for it to show up. So you've survived your first raid. You could come over to the stash tab and you can see all of your loot that you've gained throughout the raid. You could put whatever you want to keep into your stash here. Do keep in mind, until you're ready for High Roller, which is not until level 20, you will not be able to bring in, you'll see here, you will not be able to bring in anything that is colored gear. Anything that's not white or gray, you will not be able to bring in. You can go to the Squire and he'll have an option to just stash everything for you. And you could just hang on to these things until you get to the point where you could use them, or if you don't have space, you could sell them off to traders to make a little side money. Any of the craftables you loot throughout the dungeon can also be used at the traders to craft things. So as you survive raids, you'll sometimes come across some items that you can use for quests. You'll see, for example, the Alchemist has a quest to get potions, one of each of the 3 basic types. And you can gather each of them and you could turn them in for a quest. You'll see we get quest rewards here, affinity with him. All of the time that you do this, it will give him an upgrade to what his stock is and might lower the costs of it. It'll also change what they get in the crafting options. And then you get your next quest in the line. So next we're going to briefly just talk about High Roller real quick and the difference between normal mode and High Roller. High Roller, you have to be level 20 to enter and you can't use them until you get there. This is where you're going to use all of the gear you find in dungeons. You don't use them in the normal lobbies. You can't bring in anything over white gear. So if you get, a really cool blue sword, you won't be able to use it until you go into High Roller. High Roller requires 100 gold entry fee. Whether you live or die, you will pay that 100 gold entry fee, but there is much better payout to High Roller, so you will most likely make that back every raid, even if you have to leave early on. The timer also doesn't show, so until you know your way to extracts, I would recommend not touching High Roller, because you can't really tell exactly how much time you have left to get out of the dungeon. There's kind of a bar that goes down, but it doesn't give you an actual clock. It also doesn't give you a kill feed to know how many players are in the dungeon still. You won't see if a bunch of people died or if they're all alive still, though most of the time speaking, the High Roller players are a little bit better and will survive a lot more of the time, so it might be a little bit more difficult PvP wise. Throughout the dungeon as well, you'll see significant more higher difficulty mobs. So monsters in Dark and Darker have 3 different varieties to them. There is the normal ones that you'll see all over the place. There is elite ones, which are red. As you see, that goblin skin there is red. The skeletons will also be red. There's an elite crossbowman over there. And then there is black, which is a nightmare one. Generally speaking, the difference between them, the normal ones to the elite ones, are just faster and have more health and do more damage. They don't tend to do anything different other than just being generally quicker. The nightmare mobs, though, the black ones, will all have additional movesets and additional difficulties to them that will make them much more of a challenge. It is fairly rare to see nightmare mobs in the normal dungeons, though, outside of going to Inferno. Most of the time, the mobs will only be normal and occasionally elite in the normal dungeon. However, when you step up to going to High Roller, you will see nightmare monsters quite regularly now. Something to keep in mind if you have not decided whether or not you wanted to buy the full edition of the game is that High Roller is only accessible to people who fully purchase the game. So as you find gear along the way and it's got different rarities and different colors, you won't be able to use anything that's higher tier than the white basic gear unless you upgrade to going to do High Rollers. Though I do recommend playing for a long time before you start getting into High Rollers. So if you're not sure if you want to pay for the game or not, I would stick with the free to play for now. Until you're really confident that you want to start using that gear and going to High Roller, which can be a lot more challenging. So if you're still watching and enjoyed the content, if you don't mind dropping a like and subscribe. This is my first YouTube video for Dark and Darker. I'm not sure how it's going to go, but I appreciate the support. Or if you want to ask me any questions live, I stream most nights at Twitch TV, CaptainWETx, usually around 8 p.m. Eastern to around 12 a.m. Eastern. Thank you for checking out the content and have a great day.